They counted her out. They didn't just speculate, they delivered a verdict. On the sprawling digital stages where wrestling fandom thrives and festers, the conversation about the Phoenix had curdled from hopeful anticipation into mournful eulogy. It had been 7 months. 7 months since the brutal, silent exit that everyone interpreted as the final curtain call. The wrestling world moves fast, a relentless treadmill that demands constant presence, and an absence of that magnitude is usually a surrender. The narrative wrote itself. The Phoenix was burned out. Injuries, whispers of creative fatigue, the sheer crushing weight of maintaining a persona that was defined by impossibly high standards. Fans, experts, even former colleagues had already moved on to the next bright star, the next big angle. But what felt like a natural conclusion to them was, to her, an unfinished sentence. The most insidious kind of silence is the one where everyone else decides your fate for you. They spoke with a weary certainty, echoing in forums and podcasts. She's done. They didn't know the nature of the beast they were talking about. They didn't understand that a phoenix doesn't just retire, it waits for the right kind of ash. That night, as the main event started, the crowd was buzzing about who was there, oblivious to the spectral force waiting just outside the spotlight. The arena felt expectant, but settled. No one was listening for the sound of wings. The feeling backstage was a tightly wound cord, humming with a familiar, nervous energy. But amid the controlled chaos, there was a strange vacuum surrounding the women's division. The absence of the Phoenix was not just a missing person, it was a missing gravitational pull. Other stars shone brighter in the space she left behind, but the air felt thinner, the emotional stakes perceptibly lowered. Her rival, the champion, played the part perfectly, wearing the belt like a trophy that had lost its most challenging contender. Every promo was a veiled dismissal, every victory tainted by the question mark hanging over her head. You beat everyone, but did you beat her? No one had to say it out loud for the question to become a character in the story. Tonight, the champion's arrogance felt hollow, a performance being delivered to a crowd already anticipating the next chapter, a chapter without the missing piece. The commentators, veterans of the game, were careful not to mention her name, but their studied neutrality was, in itself, a glaring sign. It was the elephant not in the room, but waiting just outside the emergency exit. They had been told to be ready, but not to expect. The tension was a low, subsonic rumble, a sound only the inner circle could feel, vibrating through the metal structure of the arena. This quiet consensus, this shared belief in her final permanent departure, was the perfect foundation for the inevitable shock. The championship match was reaching its crescendo. The two competitors in the ring were exhausted, operating on fumes and adrenaline, the crowd fully invested in the near falls and desperate kicks out. It was pure, beautiful chaos, the kind of noise that drowns out everything else. Then it happened, not with a crash, but with a hard, instantaneous silence. The house lights, the spotlights, the Titantron, everything snapped off. Total, suffocating blackness. For one precious, suspended second, the crowd hesitated, mistaking it for a production error. But the professional wrestling crowd knows the language of drama. They know that deep digital darkness isn't just a mistake, it's a cue. A collective intake of breath swept through the vast arena. Then the silence broke, not with a song, but with a simple, unnerving sound. A single sustained tone, like a held note on a cello, low and vibrating through the soles of their shoes. The Titantron flickered, not to her signature logo, but to a grainy, black-and-white static image. A pair of cold, unmistakable eyes staring out from the void. Every single person who had written her off suddenly felt a sickening lurch of uncertainty. The champion in the ring paused, her hand still raised in anticipation of a finishing move, now trembling slightly. That moment stretched into an eternity. the arena sound changing from roaring intensity to a unified, low gasp of denial. The moment her face, etched in a look of almost terrifying focus, bloomed across the massive screen, the arena didn't just cheer, it imploded. It was the sound of thousands of people collectively realizing they were wrong, coupled with the ferocious joy of being proven right. The shockwave of noise hit the rafters, shaking the commentary desk, drowning out the returning lights that revealed her standing on the ramp. She didn't charge the ring. She didn't sprint. She simply walked. Each step was deliberate, a statement of ownership over the space and the moment. The commentators, veterans who had seen every shock debut and surprise return, were rendered speechless. Their stunned silence spoke volumes, confirming that this was outside the script, outside the plan. For 7 months, the narrative had been her retirement, her fade into irrelevance. Now, she was a walking, breathing monument to persistence, and the crowd was roaring its repentance and its devotion. The champion, seeing her rival, didn't look angry. She looked utterly, devastatingly betrayed. Betrayed by the world that had promised her the easy reign. This wasn't just an opponent returning, it was a ghost of doubt made flesh, appearing at the precise moment of her rival's greatest triumph, instantly invalidating everything that had happened in her absence. The Phoenix had risen, not in a blaze of glory, but in a cold, calculated, shocking return that redefined the entire landscape of the company in a single, perfect frame. The moment the Phoenix stepped through the curtain and into the spotlight, the nature of the business itself shifted. Backstage, the silence was immediate and hostile. It wasn't a triumphant reception. It was a cold, professional assessment of a sudden immense threat. For months, the other women in the locker room had been building their own legacies in her shadow, trying to prove they didn't need the pillar to stand tall. Her return instantly reduced those efforts to footnote status. The unspoken tension was heavy with resentment. Every wrestler knows the burden of expectation, but the Phoenix carried the specific, crushing weight of being the standard, the one everyone else was measured against. Now she was back, not just to compete, but to reclaim what she never officially lost. This wasn't just a career move. It was a seismic event that reshaped contracts, title pictures, and personal ambitions. The younger talent, the hopefuls who had only heard the whispered legends of her intensity, suddenly found those legends standing right beside them, impossibly tall and quiet. The drama wasn't confined to the ring. It was percolating in the hallways, where friendships were quickly assessed for weakness and allegiances were discreetly realigned. The legacy of the Phoenix wasn't just a record book. It was a psychological force, a whisper of perfection that now demanded every single person elevate their game or be swept aside. The most profound impact of her return wasn't felt in the arena, but hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, suburban home. Her family, the silent supporting cast of her turbulent career, watched the footage replay on a loop, their reactions a complex tapestry of relief, fear, and resigned understanding. Her mother, who had spent the last 7 months breathing easier, thinking the constant risk was finally over, saw the familiar, fierce focus in her daughter's eyes and knew the battle hadn't ended. It had merely moved locations. Her younger sister, who worshipped the spectacle but feared the consequences, burst into tears of pure, unadulterated excitement, seeing the hero she idolized back in her proper setting. But it was her partner, the one who saw the pain of the downtime, the restless energy of enforced healing, who felt the deepest, most conflicted surge of emotion. He had seen the private, unseen cost of the silence, the sleepless nights, the aggressive physical therapy, the quiet, aching certainty that her story was incomplete. Her decision was impulsive, secretive, and completely and utterly her. Watching her walk with that confident, dangerous stride, he knew he hadn't just gotten his wrestler back. He had gotten the whole, vital, but constantly endangered person back. The return wasn't an act of selfishness. It was an act of necessary self-completion, and they, her family, were simply forced to hold their breath and ride the storm once more. Within minutes of the screen fading to black, the shock return of the Phoenix became the only story that mattered. The moment the image of her defiant, resolute face hit the internet, it triggered a tidal wave of media chaos that felt less like reporting and more like a collective hysteria. Every major sports outlet scrambled to rewrite headlines and produce emergency podcasts. The core question dominating the airwaves wasn't why she came back, but how she kept it a secret. In a business defined by leaks, spoilers, and insider information, this level of operational security was unprecedented. The lack of knowledge fueled rampant, manic speculation. Was it a contractual loophole? Was it a single, non-negotiable favor called in directly to the company owner? The narrative instantly jumped from "the Phoenix is done" to "the Phoenix is manipulating the entire system." This secret-keeping was not just a successful plot device. It was a psychological power move, demonstrating that she operated on a different plane than everyone else. This control over her own narrative instantly elevated her status from returning star to a mythic disruptive force. The media, desperate for angles, began to dissect every flicker of emotion from the other wrestlers, turning every backstage interview into a high-stakes psychological drama about who was genuinely happy and who was secretly terrified by the sudden reintroduction of the benchmark. The most compelling drama, however, was still unfolding in the center of the ring. When the champion finally composed herself, the resulting confrontation was less a shouting match and more a deeply unsettling tableau. The champion, usually explosive and arrogant, was reduced to a simmering, wounded fury. The Phoenix offered no words, no taunts, just a silent, measured assessment of the person who had tried to occupy her throne. Her calmness was terrifying. It wasn't the calm of indifference, but the absolute chilling tranquility of someone who has already won the psychological war. She had forced the champion to acknowledge, in front of the world, that her entire reign had been conditional, her authority borrowed. The champion's words, when they finally came, were desperate, loaded with the implication of personal betrayal, not just professional rivalry. "You should have stayed gone!" she screamed, the sound echoing in the momentary lull of the crowd. The Phoenix simply titled her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement that spoke volumes. It was the visual equivalent of shaking her head at a child. The message was clear. I didn't leave because I was finished. I left to prove that without me, you would always feel incomplete. The whole scene was a masterclass in cinematic wrestling storytelling, a confrontation built not on punches, but on the soul-crushing weight of emotional leverage. The subsequent weeks were a blur of escalating intensity. Every interview, every confrontation, every match felt like a prelude to a defining moment. But beneath the surface of the standard comeback narrative, a subtle, unsettling pattern began to emerge. The Phoenix wasn't engaging in the usual trash talk. She wasn't targeting the championship with the rabid hunger expected of a returning star. Instead, her focus seemed fragmented, almost deliberately misplaced. She didn't seek out the champion, but rather, she systematically sought out the most promising, newest, and most vulnerable members of the roster. Her matches with them were brutal, clinical, and seemingly without malice. She was dismantling their confidence, not their bodies. This quiet deviation from the expected script started to confuse the commentators and the fans. Why return with such a seismic shock only to focus on the periphery? The truth, unseen and unsaid, was a heavy realization dawning slowly on a few insiders. She hadn't returned for the belt. She had returned because of a promise. During her 7 months away, she hadn't just been healing. She had been watching the company she helped build rely on complacency. She saw the standard of competition plateau and the spirit of the locker room wither under predictable booking. The shocking return was the defibrillator, and her subsequent actions were the painful, necessary shock to the system. The grand finale came weeks later, after she had defeated and psychologically decimated her final target. A young, promising wrestler left sobbing in the ring, not from pain, but from the realization of her own shortcomings. The Phoenix finally picked up a microphone. The arena held its breath, expecting the challenge, the declaration of intent against the champion. What she delivered was something far colder and far more meaningful. She addressed the devastated young wrestler, her voice low and clear cutting through the silence. "They said I was done," she stated, looking directly at the tearful talent. "But my problem wasn't that I was finished. My problem was that you were." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the entire roster that had gathered to watch the segment. "You became too comfortable. You celebrated my absence. And when the cat is away, the mice don't just play, they forget how to hunt." Then came the twist, the final, chilling revelation that redefined her entire return. She didn't challenge the champion. Instead, she announced that she was taking an indefinite hiatus, her mission complete. "I didn't come back to take the belt," she concluded, dropping the microphone and looking directly at the heartbroken young star. "I came back to remind you of the standard. Now, carry the weight." She walked away, leaving not a champion, but an entire division with a new, terrifying level of expectation, realizing the true purpose of her shocking return was not for her own glory, but to brutally forge the next generation under the pressure of her temporary, unforgettable shadow.